Welcome to This Team Is Killing Us, a podcast about what the Carolina Panthers do to good people on a snowy day here in Raleigh. She is Lauren Brownlow, built for comfort. I am Demetri Ravanis, very much built for, I guess, comfort, but also it is still very insanely hot in my house. So I am dressed down, Lauren, while you are bundled up.
Yeah, I mean, I'm only ever going to put the temperature to a certain level in my my apartment. And so when it gets colder outside, I refuse to just turn up the heat.
Yeah.
And instead, will just wrap myself with my little sweater here.
For people that have never experienced life in a house with, I guess they're called, is it called a cathedral ceiling, where like only the second floor is only half of the size of the first floor. So there's this big opening. Anyway, we have a fireplace downstairs, and heat and sound just shoot straight up like a cannon. So up here in the office where I record, very toasty today. But let's dive into the show. What is killing me today is Lauren, you and I, you especially because I'm older than you are very old. Have you seen the Athletics list of 50 influential NFL personalities, I guess, or people under the age of 40?
I literally just got the alert not long ago, and I haven't clicked it yet. But yes, I did see that it was coming out. And at first I was like, oh, they mean players. And then I was like, oh, no, they don't.
No, they absolutely do not. So Dave Idzik, the offensive coordinator who does not call plays, is the only on-field person from the Panthers to make the list. This, by the way, is how I learned that Dave Canales is actually older than me. I thought he was like a young wonderkind.
How old is he?
He's 43, just like I am, but he's like a few months older than me. Right? He looks amazing.
I thought he was like 37 easily.
I thought he was like 39, but I did not guess over 40 for the life of me. I would not have guessed that.
Oh, he's older than me. I feel a little less creepy. Never mind. Let's just keep going.
Well, all right. So here is the one, or I guess three that blew me away. First of all, I can't remember. Christy, is it Coleman, who was the president of the Panthers for 2 years and now is the president and CEO of all of Tepper Sports, whatever the organization is, Tepper Sports Properties. 33, and is largely credited with getting Dave to get his head out of his ass. So that's one. The other, Sean McVay, who has been a head coach for a long time, and Greg Olsen, who has been retired for a long time. Both of them are 39. Right?
See, if you had told me that Greg Olsen was younger than Dave Canales, I would have been like, shut up. No, he's not.
Yeah.
But maybe that's just because like I've known him since he was like, I don't know, 19.
Yeah, same thing with McVay, right? Like it has been a long time since the Rams got to that incredibly boring Super Bowl they lost to New England. But even that, like, wasn't his first year on the job. So was he like 32 or 33 when he became an NFL head coach?
He was pretty, I mean, I know he was pretty young. And like now that's a little bit more of a routine thing around the league, I think, like hiring younger coaches. But like McVay remains this guy, I feel like that. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the analogy is, but people are fascinated by him. And like, I'm not, I don't think he's like bad. I think he's smart football coach and good and knows what he's doing. But like the level of fascination with him, in my opinion, has always exceeded like what we've actually seen out of him.
Yeah, I mean, remember that at one point Cliff Kingsbury gets hired to be the head coach of the Cardinals after getting fired by Texas Tech because not that he worked with Sean McVay, but because he was friends with Sean McVay. Like his influence was like insanely.
That's when I was like, that's when I was like, all right, we maybe taking this a little far. It was like, I used to do jokings in college football of like, how much have you been touched by Bama? Because as however much that is, would correspond with your playoff positioning usually. So.
Well, and also, so you mean like other teams,
just like any adjacent, you played them,
there was also the adjacency to Nick Saban of like, no matter how bad you failed at a job, if Nick Saban like touched your head, you could at least get hired by like Old Dominion, right?
And I mean, P.S. we do this with Bill Belichick for some reason.
Oh, for sure. Like, in fact, I was telling a friend of mine who is like sort of does a podcast like this one for the Patriots. He's from Boston. He's never worked in Boston, but that's where all of his passions are.
That's your friend? I'm just kidding.
No, it's very fair. He was like dumbfounded that I made the statement that I don't know if it is funnier that the Patriots hired or keep hiring Josh McDaniels or that anybody has hired Matt Patricia. And that is like 100%. Like, I think it's been proven with both of them that was all either Bill Belichick or Tom Brady.
Yeah, Matt Patricia is especially egregious for multiple reasons. Because literally everywhere he leaves gets better when he's gone. Right.
And I don't think, like, I think if you look, I could be wrong about this, but I think if you look at his Wikipedia page, there is a section about the celebration in Detroit in the locker room when he got fired. Like, he is also not especially like.
Yeah. Everyone hates him and he's not good at coaching. Other than that, I think we got a job in here for him somewhere. It's like,
but Lauren, the pencil behind his ear, and he's an actual rocket scientist. No, I'm with you.
Well, maybe he should go do that.
Let's dive into, I mean, look, standards are very low now, as we know, across across that industry. All right, let's dive into a little bit of Panthers killing us. Did you see this link I sent you that Cat Scratch Reader put together of just the absolute pain this franchise has suffered in the second round of the NFL draft over the last 6 drafts?
Yeah, I mean, I've looked over some of it. I haven't gotten in full detail, but like, actually, as soon as I read the headline, I was immediately like, "Oh yes." The
NFL
like
draft,
that tracks for me. Yeah.
For everybody else, the NFL draft very much is the time to rebuild. I think after reading this, it really illustrates that like the NFL draft here is like round 2 versus the Carolina Panthers, because even the two success stories and like, let's temper what we call success, right? Itir Gross-Matos and Jeremy Chin, they let both of those guys walk for nothing as free agents. So with that in mind, there is very little that you can look at and say a draft position that is very important. You're getting someone you think is going to be a starter. The recent history is bad.
Yeah, I mean, I think like inarguably Chin is the biggest, like you said, like, oh, they hit with this guy. But there are some names on there that you're like, ugh.
Yeah.
And this, by the way, this like maybe unconsciously, this played into my thinking about the Jonathan Brooks pick, because it's like, this isn't the place to take that risk. I'm sorry.
Well, and look, that's why I think it continues, right? Even though I like the talent that Brooks is, like, you can't deny as we sit here on February 19th, 2025, like, it's more of the same with the Panthers in the second round. Real quick, let's run through. Greg Little, who the Panthers gave up on as an offensive tackle, I believe ended up trading him away for a 7th round pick. Whatever the case is, now he's out of the league entirely. Terrence Marshall Jr., wide receiver out of LSU, one of those places that produces wide receivers that turn into stars in the NFL, right? Not in Carolina. He was on the Raiders roster this year. Lauren, would you care to guess how many catches Terrence Marshall Jr. had for the Raiders this year?
I'm going to guess 0.
You are a little bit low, but not very. He had 3 for the entirety of the season. And by the way, had 3 catches, did not get over 30 yards on the year. And then the other ones are ones we know pretty well. Jonathan Mingo never came together. Jonathan Brooks. Look, Jonathan Brooks could still have a bright future, but as we sit here right now, our 2nd round pick last year is not going to play next year and barely played this past season. So I think it's fair to say he belongs
exactly what I was worried about. Yeah, that's literally the exact thing. I was like, I get he's talented. I get what he could be. But to me, this reeks of a situation where he's going to be not playing very much. And it was even less than even I thought, to be honest. And I hate that, because I don't want to be all like, oh, I'm right because somebody tore his ACL again. Like, I hate it. Feels gross. I don't like it either. But it's also like, this is why I was so irritated by it. And you have to You absolutely have to get guys that you can build around. That's what the draft is for. It's probably honestly, it's probably my biggest critique of the DanMorgan era to date, which I guess if that's the case, not the end of the world, because I get why they did it at least, but sort of. They probably didn't love Chuba as much as I did, but I still just look back on it and just shake my head because it just feels like such a waste, because those are such important picks. There are a lot of really good players in college football. There are still plenty to pick from when you get to the second round. And it just feels like, they could have addressed a lot of potential needs and weren't able to do that in any meaningful way whatsoever, except for Chin. And that was a different, the situation on the roster changed significantly before they let him go, but Chin was the best pick by far. There's no, I mean, Gross Matos isn't bad, but it's,
no, and that's why I say he is the other quote unquote success, but he's not, that's not, hell, you can't even say Gross Matos was to Carolina what Dalton was when he was a second round pick in Cincinnati. And I know you're comparing a pass rusher to a quarterback there, but I don't think there was ever a time in Cincinnati where you thought Andy Dalton it's settled. The Bengals can never upgrade from that. Gross Matos is the second round pick of this 6-year run. And I mean, that's a pretty low bar, right? And so I'm not a big superstition guy, especially when it comes to the draft. I'm not a big believer that a GM or front office in general's past actions dictate what is going to happen next year. I think so much of it is on the way the player develops. But, I've talked about it on this show. I've talked about it online. I think if I were running the Panthers draft, I would focus, if they are keeping the 8th pick, I would focus on a corner or a safety if it's Malachi Starks, because the pass rush class is so deep. You can find a potential star at 57. And now I think, oh, gosh, but do you want to bank on that given what this team does in the second round of the draft?
I would really like to see that, because a lot of times I think we've seen them kind of zag in that round.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, wide receiver, that was a little more justifiable of a pick in some of the years when that happened.
Yeah.
But right now, I think it's pretty clear that this team has a lot of needs on defense. Okay.
Right.
And so I would like to see those addressed. Cute and all, and I felt that way last year too, by the way. I mean, I'm not saying that they didn't have offensive needs. I mean, obviously they had some, but I was I did not understand. That was my issue last year, was okay, well, your defense is losing a lot and you kind of need to bolster that a little bit. And then they go and draft Brooks, and it's well, there goes that. And so,
yeah. And I mean, look,
yeah.
When they trade up into that position to get Brooks, one place where they went into the season with literally no one on the roster was at center. Zach Frazier from West Virginia was sitting right there. To me, I thought it was a no-brainer. That's obviously what you're doing. And both into that draft, both you and I agreed they've got to help the offensive line. And to your point, and
they did, in free agency, but
Well, not only did they do it in free agency, I think that kicking in last year's starters at guard inside the center, I think both of those guys succeeded in various ways. I don't feel like the team has to go out and find a center in free agency or in the draft this year. But to your point, it's a zag when you make an aggressive move to get up to move up in the draft, when both you and I recognize there's so many other needs on the roster at that point.
I think you make a move like that if you're a pretty good team year in and year out, and you're usually flirting with the playoffs. Maybe you get there sometimes, maybe you don't. And maybe you have a chance to make a run, and then you go, oh, okay, well, this talent is sitting right there. What if it works? What if he's fine? Let's just take a chance on it. That's not where the Panthers were. So that made it even more incomprehensible to me. Plus the fact that I love Chuba even since the year before,
So here's where I'll disagree with you a little bit. And this is this is less about Chuba and Brooks and more about DanMorgan. To me, trading up for Brooks did not necessarily mean that they were out on Chuba.
Well, yeah.
I think the difference is Morgan had a very clear vision, certainly more than Fitterer, certainly more than the second tenure of Marty Herney, and frankly, probably more than Gettleman. Morgan was very good at recognizing what the best teams in the league are doing at running back. And I don't think he ever thought about Brooks as replacing Chuba. I think he thought of it as Chuba and Brooks make the perfect two-headed monster that will give Bryce the help he needs.
Yes, but that's like a luxury. Like that's something you do when you're good. Like when you're a good, you're like, oh, well, we've got this talented guy right here that can be thunder and lightning with Chuba. You don't do that when you have a number of glaring needs elsewhere that you could address with a very valuable pick. And that was always my issue with it.
So I hear you. I don't think it's necessarily a luxury in a lot of situations. Where I will agree with you, though, is they did have Miles Sanders on the roster, right? Like if you wanted to do the thunder and lightning, what if you just used Miles Sanders differently instead of, expecting him to be the guy getting most of the carries because of what the contract was? Look, we can dissect this a million different ways. The fact of the matter is, when they go into the draft this year, like they are competing with a lot of recent history that says the second round pick is a tightrope.
Will be terrible.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I tried to be nicer about it, but you're not wrong.
Well, if you're DanMorgan, do you trade it and try to like collect a few more thirds just because like it's like bad juju at this point? Or do you just go, you know what? No, fuck this. I am making a good second round pick this year because I have grown. And that's the thing too. Like, I'm not like crucifying DanMorgan for what he did. You hope, and you have seen this, I feel like, from Dan, that you kind of like learn from your mistakes and grow and become better. And so I would love to see him make a pick in the second round. Well, love to see it. Will I be like almost vomiting nervous? Probably.
Yeah. I never know how to pronounce this kid's last name, but is it Donovan? Is it Eziraku out of Boston College? Like, he seems like an absolute superstar pass rusher to me. But there is this like dark feeling I got after reading that of like, oh, he'd be an absolute superstar if, like, say, the Steelers take him in the second round. The Panthers will find a way to ruin that completely.
See, now I'm like going in my head and I'm like, what could they do that would like make me as mad as I was when they drafted Jimmy Clausen, which is the maddest I've ever been during a Panthers draft. And I think it would be like
tell you what
draft a tight end or something.
I was going to say draft a pass catcher, because I think there are good ones at tight end in this draft. There are two good ones at wide receiver. And if you take any other pass catcher in this draft, you're taking the same Jonathan Mingo gamble again. Like, you've seen it be really good in college, but you never saw him like as a feature in college. And that's what you need right now. Like, to me, that's the thing that, like, I am going to forget text. I'm going to call you and need you to talk me off a ledge if they do that in round 2. Cause
I will probably be very unwell if that happens.
I mean, it's just like, what is the dumbest thing you could do based on draft position and your needs and the talent available? Like, to me, that's it. Obviously this year is round 2.
I almost said quarterback, but
you know what's funny? One of the sites that I look at regularly for draft information, there are a few different ones, and all but one have like zeroed in on Panthers needs, defensive backs, and pass rush. Like that's 100% what the Panthers need. There is one that insists that, like, well, don't rule out them taking a quarterback. And that makes me think, like, okay, this is the source I can take the least seriously about.
I mean, I wouldn't rule out them taking one at any point. Like,
but like you take like Riley Leonard in round 7, right? Like this idea
that's what I'm saying, right? Exactly.
Silly.
Actually, I'd kind of dig that, because you can do some gadgety stuff with him that might be cool. But
if you're taking Riley Leonard to be your Taysom Hill, okay.
Franchise.
If you're taking him to be your quarterback, no, thank you.
And I love Riley, but no offense, but yeah, no.
Yeah,
there's not a quarterback in this draft, frankly, that I would want to be my franchise quarterback personally. So I am at least somewhat relieved.
Not for Carolina, for sure. Like, I think Shedeur Sanders is a day one starter if he goes somewhere that's like gonna get the personality in line. And that's not here, obviously.
to be fair, my feelings about quarterback usually mirror my feelings about any sort of like romantic relationship I ever get in or don't, is because I'm just very skeptical. I'm always very like I will find a reason to doubt on even like some of the, because we've seen some of the best guys we've seen in college that seem like no-brainers get into the league and look like garbage. We've seen guys that looked like trash in college at times get into the league and suddenly look good. Like, so I feel like you can't like, the only person I was ever sure about, thank God, was when the Panthers drafted Cam Newton. And I was so happy. But like a lot of times I'm very nervous when they draft quarterbacks because I'm like, and wide receiver, forget it. I'm usually like a puddle of nerves on the floor because I know how that usually goes for us.
It's a conversation that I had on this podcast when we were doing the talk through episodes last season with Ryan Leaf, where he talked about, you look at all of these guys that we say we call busts. Some of it is definitely on their ability to adapt to the league, but we don't often put the same scrutiny on the situation they're stepping into, which probably is why you got to give Cam more credit for his mentality, for his mental game than he ever got. Right. Because,
pulling up those bunch of losers.
I was about to say, if he thought he was walking into a locker room full of losers, he sure didn't show it, until recently.
No, he never did. No.
Yeah.
Oh, God, Cam.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. As we head towards free agency, you're already starting to see some teams basically say, if we can't get a deal done, this guy is going to get the franchise tag. There are a few guys that I think it does. First of all, Panthers are not using the franchise tag, right? Franchise tag instantly vaults you up to one of the top 5 salaries at your position in the league. There's nobody that's becoming an unrestricted free agent for the Panthers that the Panthers are going to do that for. However, I do look at, like, Cincinnati says if they can't get a deal done with TeeHiggins, they're probably going to do that. Okay, that's a name you and I had talked about. Josh Sweat probably is going to get the franchise tag treatment in Philadelphia. That would have been a big help to Carolina. Byron Murphy, one of the better defensive backs coming on the market, probably going to get the franchise tag in Minnesota. And so this is where trying to forecast what the team could be for next season gets tough because, you can think about the draft all you want. You can have the pie in the sky dreams for free agency. I've never liked the franchise tag. I think it's crazy unfair to the players. Yeah. I know that the owners frame it as for the fans. And actually, I get that argument of keeping a guy in town. I do think as much as it is a team's chance to control a superstar they are afraid of losing, it is such a financial risk that, like, if the Panthers never tag anyone again, I'd be A-okay with that.
Yeah, I don't love it either. I'm with you. I understand why some teams do it, especially like with quarterbacks, because it's available and it's there. Although I wouldn't do it to my quarterback because it would piss him off. Yeah. But I understand. It used to be a lot more prevalent, I think, than that is today because they're afraid of pissing off the quarterback. Most of them.
Well, I mean, look, remember Baltimore did it to Lamar, but they also used that time to make sure they had a real long-term deal done before Lamar actually took the field under the franchise tag. The guy that seems like, yeah, I guess you do that for is TeeHiggins, who, like, did you see this report of what his asking price is going to be when he hits the market?
I'm sure it's too high for
it is higher than all of the available cap money that the Panthers have right now. He intends to ask for at least $33 million a year. So if that's what the asking price is going to be, you're the Bengals. Shit, you tag him. Like what's the difference at that point?
Yeah, I mean, and like that's why for me that like I wasn't. It's not like I'm against going out and getting like a good free agent receiver or someone who can bolster the core and whatever. But I also just think, there's so much cap money already wrapped up in the offense that like, if you're going to go free agent, like big splash, I would rather them go on the defensive side at this point. And like, B, I'm not saying that the pass catching collection is set and great and it's going to be fine. But at the same time, like, is it good enough for this team to be able to compete when Bryce is playing the way he was towards the end of the year, especially with Jatavian Sanders back and healthy? I say, and like Tremble really becoming a bigger part of the offense too. Like, I really say yes. But I'm not saying it's total, like they should stop.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, like, in terms of getting a big name, like I get your rationale on it. I just feel like so much money. If you look at the discrepancy, it's actually wild. Like, it is wild how much more money is wrapped up in this offense. And by the way, it showed on the field in a big way last year. So it's like, if they have some extra, like the defense probably like, hey guys, you have some extra cash to spend this year. Can we have some of that? I'm just saying.
Okay, so this is what I think is always really interesting about trying to figure out how free agency is going to shake out, not just for the Panthers, but across the league, is like the Panthers really bided their time and got team-friendly-ish deals on DJ Wanham and on Jadeveon Clowney. I think at this point, like with those guys, I think it makes more sense to cut them and try and re-sign them at a lower rate than pay them what it is they are locked in for this year. And in part, it's because of the cap situation, right? Like I look at, I think a veteran dominant wide receiver is the thing that Bryce needs to take the next step. And I look at a guy like ChrisGodwin in Tampa, who is familiar with Canales, who has a history of posting big numbers, is probably not going to get tagged by Tampa. But here's the thing, and this is me actually agreeing with you to a certain extent. Yeah. It's not just about who has to get cut to make a move like that. If, let's say, like this isn't going to happen, right? But let's just say, for the sake of argument, let's say the Panthers and the 49ers work out a deal for Debo, and the 49ers are willing to take, hey, we'll take just a second round pick for Debo Samuel.
Well, at this point, I might say yes, considering
Lauren, what I'm reading says the 49ers are expecting to get less than that for Debo because everybody knows
we talked about that, and I was like, great.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're the Panthers, you've got to, if that's a possibility, you've got to make a run. But here's the thing.
Oh, yeah. That's what I'm saying. If it's something like that where it's more affordable, whatever.
But here's the thing, Lauren. Like, I think if you're bringing in a dude like that, you literally cannot fiscally afford to just trade the draft pick. You've got to get them to take a Jadeveon Clowney. You got to get them to take maybe even an Adam Thielen. Like, you've got to get like a $6 to $7 million guy off your books to make that make sense. Or else they're just going to end up being cut.
Well, in that case, like, I'm good without them doing it because it's like, what's the point? You know, and like I said, like, I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying about Godwin. And if this team were I would be like, yes, let's get Bryce to that next step. But at the same time, if the offense is putting up, hypothetically, I don't expect this, but let's say the offense puts up 30 points a game, the defense is going to be allowing 40. Okay.
I totally
needs to win too, to take the next step. Like this team and him, they need to learn to win. And without a defense that's a lot better, that's not going to be happening next year.
Yeah, I totally agree with you and totally believe that the defense should be the priority. I guess my hang up is as much as I just like you am rooting for XL to take the next step. I'm not taking it for granted necessarily.
I'm nervous. I hate it because I like him. I like him more than some of the others that have been like potential fail receivers that they've drafted. And boy, have there been a boatload of them. Okay. Just their faces blend. I don't know why Legadoo Nane always comes to mind first. Probably the unique name. But like, and I don't even know if Nane was supposed to be that good. So I'm probably being unfair to him. But like, it's just like one of those things where it's like, you want it for them. I think Kelvin was probably the closest for me because I loved watching him at Florida State.
That's the dude I think is the fairest comparison to what the expectation versus the lowest possible output could be, right? Because they drafted about the same area. They had coming out of college, very important. They had the same body type, right? Certainly Kelvin's changed.
I mean, Kelvin is like an alien from space.
Yeah,
Still.
I mean, but that's the thing. Like at South Carolina, XL looked that way too. So, like, I think it's a good comparison, and it's part of the fear I have of not being able to take the next step. Real quick, do want to tell you about the super secret OG Hat Vault. Go to, ogtrianglemedia.com. Go to the Joe's podcast, Ovius and Giglio, and you will see a link to get this very cool old school ACC logo hat with the Ovius and Giglio podcast logo on it. It's only available for a limited time until the 25th. And once it's gone forever. It's a new thing we are trying with merchandise here. And while you're at OG Triangle Media, if you are not already a member of OG Fans, you should sign up because, Lauren, I quite enjoyed your, I don't want to call it takedown, more of a breakdown of your feelings on Cam, not only calling...
They're complicated. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, not only calling his teammates losers, but then doubling down on it rather than even acknowledging, hey, losers is a harsh word.
This was literally me. I was just like, because it's just, yeah, it's too much. It's just like you want them to not do that, and you see them doing it, and you're like, please don't do this. Like, you could just not do this very easy thing to not do, and it'd be fine. Or you could walk it back, and it'd be fine. And instead, it's like you just want to die on this hill. I mean, it's not the first time I've been let down by him in some way, I'll say, as I wrote about, but still, it always sucks when it happens because nobody's made me feel the way he made me play football. Nobody. So
there's all kinds of fun stuff that is being written about on the OG Fans platform. Lauren has her Panthers columns every Monday. She has her pop culture columns every Friday and is in the middle of a exhaustive review of every single movie nominated for an Oscar this year. There is also, look, today, Tom Edwards just put out this great piece on the butterfly effect of one move the Carolina Hurricanes made just a few years ago. Joe Giglio has given you the ACC long shot that is worth putting money on in the NCAA tournament. I wrote about why, if the WNBA really wants to come back to North Carolina, Raleigh makes way more sense than Charlotte. Like, we are covering everything in the world of North Carolina sports and more. So sign up today, ogtrianglemedia.com. All right, Lauren, I want to circle back on the conversation about ChubaHubbard and Jonathan Brooks, because last night in doing some prep for the show, I stumbled across this kind of long interview that Chuba did with the CBC back in his homeland of Canada, where he talked about injuries. He talked about being replaced. I mean, he talked basically about Jonathan Brooks without ever saying Jonathan's name. And I think just reading it, it sounds like ChubaHubbard likes the idea of Jonathan Brooks at his very best being a part of this team.
I think that's wonderful. Like, it just, I love him so much. Yeah. I read the quote and I was like, oh my God, I love him so much more even now. Like, and you know what? He speaks like someone with a lot of perspective on life. And I think a lot of the players of his generation are like that. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's why you see guys retiring sooner than we used to see and things like that, that they just have realized. And some of it from people who came before them. And some of those guys would say that they made the mistake of playing too long or whatever. And they don't view this as like the central, it is a huge part of their lives, and they dedicate lives to it. I'm not saying they don't, but it's also like, you got to have a little bit of perspective when it comes to life and football. And I just think, like he said, I play football because I love it, and you see that like passion, and like, he's not playing football because he feels like he has to, or because, like anything like that. You see that passion, I think, in the way that he plays. And that's what I love so much about him. There's just nothing that he leaves out there in terms of effort ever. And that's why he endeared himself to me so quickly.
So I want to read this quote real quick about Jonathan Brooks, and I am going to ask you a question that you might roll your eyes at, but I do want your honest response to this. So first, the CBC asks him how he felt when he found out that the Panthers were, like we said, not just taking another running back, but trading up in the second round to get Jonathan Brooks. Here's what ChubaHubbard said, quote, "I probably feel the opposite. I kind of feel a weight has been lifted off of me in terms of trying to take care of my family and having that in the back of my mind. I play football because I love it. I'm a competitor and I love competing. So the higher the stakes or the odds, however you want to look at it, the more I'm into it. I would say I wouldn't say that's pressure, but even if it was, I love it." That sounds like a dude that's not threatened.
I think like Chuba was a 4th round pick. Yep. I had to look to refresh it. I'm sure and a lot of these guys like thrive on being doubted even when they're not actually and stuff like that and have to manufacture it. But like for him, I think he's always known he's going to have to like kind of earn his way. And you saw him. It was very clear to me that there were two players on the really, really terrible Panthers team from 2 years ago that gave a shit every single day, no matter what. And one of them was Frankie Louvu and the other one was ChubaHubbard. And and that's not to say that no one else did. It's just, you're totally human and it's hard. Yeah. Like I would have been the same way. Like I am not blaming them. I'm not like, it's hard. It's demoralizing to go out and feel like you have no chance. And so I understand. But like he never played like, he always played like they were just in the fourth quarter of a close game, Chuba and Frankie too. And like, I just think that's such a unique talent and like something like it is a talent to me, like to have that mentality at all times. And I think he doesn't mind competing. I minded more on his behalf than he did apparently. So like good for him. But because I was like, no, this is not okay.
So I'm glad you bring that up because here's where I wonder what your reaction is going to be. Because I thought about this as you were talking about what you loved about Chuba before I read the quote. I wonder how much playing for MikeGundy instilled that in him, because Gundy is a guy who is really good at looking in places other people are not looking for, assistant coaches and for players, right? And so like for a kid from like the middle of Canada to end up in Stillwater, Oklahoma, that is the result of a coach, or at the very least a coaching staff and coaching culture that is prioritizing finding guys that other people are overlooking. Okay, that's the positive. The negative is, MikeGundy makes that stand for OAN, wearing the hat, talking about how they're the only news network that is actually out there telling the truth in the middle of this nation having a reckoning in 2020 with racial equality and the relationship that Black men have with the greater part, or with the wider world in America. ChubaHubbard tweets that it's not okay, and somehow it ends up with ChubaHubbard apologizing on camera to MikeGundy. Like, in that moment, I have to believe ChubaHubbard had to have this, like, I don't know if epiphany is the right word, but he had to have this realization that, there are going to be people that only see me as valuable to accomplishing their goals. And I don't even necessarily mean MikeGundy, or maybe I should say, I don't even necessarily just mean MikeGundy in that. Like, that's all of Oklahoma State University in that particular analogy. I wonder how much of that instilled in Chuba that this is not even worth doing anymore if you don't love doing it. And clearly he does.
That's so interesting. Yeah. I mean, I would not have thought of that all to put together, but that's, I feel like that's you using your movie brain in a good way, to kind of like keep it together and make those connections. Well, but I mean, I love that.
I think this is one of those things where, like, you and I and a lot of our friends, like, we like all of college football, right? Like, we don't just zero in on one team. We like the whole wider world. And I think Gundy is a complicated dude in the fact that he seems, like dense as hell, but also is this really other level operator in terms of thinking about actual football. Like, that had to be what attracted Chuba to, uprooting from Canada to fucking Stillwater, Oklahoma. And then for that same dude to feel betrayed by that same dude had to have had some kind of effect on it.
Yeah. And he probably also learned then that there's only so many things that it's worth saying out loud.
Right.
When you're, I mean, and I hate to say that, because like I was really happy that he said that in the moment, and there was probably no better moment for him to say something like that than then. In terms of the way he would be perceived by like the fans and everybody outside of that, to speak up like that. I would hope now people would also be supportive, but You never know. I think a lot more people would feel comfortable shouting him down now. I'll put it that way. But at the same time, like, I respect so much that he was willing to say that. And he, like, do I think he meant that apology? No, not necessarily.
No, I mean,
but
like,
I think he also understood, like, what's the point? Like, I'm here to play football. Like, I'm not going to change Mike Gundy's mind on Black people. You know,
right. And he had to know, like, it's his last year. It's too late to enter the portal at that point. Like, there was no win. Real quick, before we move on to the end of the show, I do want to get one more quote in there. He talked about what life has been like for him on the football field after a serious injury. This was not necessarily asked about what Jonathan Brooks can expect, or, you know, what he expects now with his quote unquote competition or partner or whatever you want to say, dealing with some serious ACL injuries. It was just about how you go about playing football again after, like, the knee injuries that Chuba had. And I think there is a little bit of a tip of the hat to Jonathan Brooks in his answer. Hubbard says, my body has changed. I've had knee surgeries. It's some pretty intense groin surgeries that have kind of altered the way I run and my speed and stuff like that. I've just had to take a different kind of approach in the way I ran the ball, the way I moved, and what my body needed from me to be at my best. Surgeries take a long time to recover from, much longer than people think on average, myself included. I mean, to me, that is sort of a like, hey, man, we need you at 100. We don't need you as fast as possible. I could hold this down. Whoever they bring in, whether it's, you know, elevating Raheem Blackshear or they bring in someone else to fill that role until Brooks is ready, we can hold it down. Be smart. Don't rush yourself back. You can still have a long career in this league.
Yeah, which is really sweet. And also, like, you do see that. I mean, having covered sports for as long as I have, and you too, I'm sure, like, that it's always been one of my more fascinating things to track with guys is like their injury recovery process, and like how, because psychologically it's so challenging. And, you know, even just getting the injury in the first place and just feeling like, why me, and all of that stuff, and just like, and feeling like, oh, I'm never going to be the same, and learning to trust like the leg or the groin. Well, you know, whatever, whatever. But yeah, like learning to trust that again is such a psychologically interesting thing to me. And I guess you probably make like adaptations that you don't even, like, some athletes will talk about like doing things differently that they don't even realize they're doing, or like overcompensating so much they end up tearing the other ACL or whatever it is. And like, it's just so interesting to me. Like, you try so hard not to like hurt yourself, and it's easier said than done, far easier. But the guys that tend to have the most success are the ones that do take care of their body and try to be mindful of that, but that don't think as much or let that intrusive thought come in their mind constantly about like, oh, am I about to get hurt if I plant this way, or if I do this, or you know. But yeah, I find that all that, so it's so nice that he's like, oh, he's looking out for his guy. Like, who doesn't love Chuba?
Yeah, agreed. Before
don't
we
do
go,
something bad, Chuba, please. I need you to be good. Thank you.
Before we go, AndyDalton coming back next year, 2-year, $10 million deal. Should say up to $10 million deal. Looks like it is technically valued at $8, $6 million of which is guaranteed. It is clear to me that they believe there is something important about Andy being there for the development of Bryce, and honestly, the development of this young offense. He clearly provides something, even on the sidelines, that the team feels like they need, because you could find a more one-for-one kind of backup to Bryce, probably at a much lower price if you hit the open market. Andy clearly matters to this team.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, did the amount make me raise my eyebrows slightly when I saw it? Yep. Yes, it did. I do I can't argue with anything you just said, though. But I mean, again, it's like we talked about with the cap. Like, you don't have much money already, and so like it does.
That's why,
and this is more offense, so it's like.
I mean, look, that's why I'm not going to plant my flag here and stand on this is a smart move. I'm not sure it is. I just think it tells you that Canales clearly sees a reason that Andy needs to be there.
And I don't why was my first reaction his facial expressions? But it was. I do love his facial expressions on the sideline.
Let me ask you a question about that. Do you think you would love them as much if he did not have shockingly red hair? Is that part of what makes the facial expressions really pop?
Maybe. I think it's the eyebrows though for me. Really
Okay.
that do it. Because he has like very like lightning-y eyebrows. And I think that really always really frames whatever face he's saying pretty well. But yeah, I mean, look, I get it. And like Bryce clearly trusts him and is close with him. And I know that stuff matters. And so like for me, like, you know, I hate to say this might have been like your substitute a little bit for like a ChrisGodwin-esque type signing, but I mean, it might just be in terms of like, okay, let's have Andy's special boy stay here. Right. Or like Bryce's special boy stay here, special man, whatever, because I guess he's way older than him, so I shouldn't say that. But like, you know, his special like mentor backup, whatever you want to call him, and like let's get some continuity here too, and not have to worry about some guy coming in here and potentially being trash. I mean, it's not like you can't go wrong with some of those guys either, right? Like, I mean, you know, you can have guys in there as your backup that you're like, oh, this guy will be fine, and then they get in there and throw like 6 picks, and your quarterback's hurt, and you've got a shitty quarterback.
Well, I mean, look, we talked about this, that like the best 1-for-1 comparison to what Bryce does that is on the market is Zach Wilson. And that's exactly what you're talking about. Like if Bryce gets hurt.
Yeah, that would make me feel a little squirrely.
Right. Yeah. Like I was about to say there is no ceiling with Zach Wilson, but the reality is there's no floor with Zach Wilson. It's probably.
It would have been Teddy. It would have been Teddy for me, but if I'm Teddy, I wouldn't want to come back here either.
No, I agree. So. Like I think honestly, I think Jacoby Brissett would have been the ideal.
Brissett would have been great.
Like the 1-to-1 comparison that we talked about was Zach, and that's you know, like you're right. I think clearly what they are telling you is Bryce is comfortable with the fact that Andy being here is not a threat to him. Like the ball is in Bryce's court to hang on to this. Like bringing the guy that we benched you for back has nothing to do with our confidence in you. Bryce clearly believes that. Dave Canales clearly sees value for him, for Bryce, for everybody else on that offense by Andy still being the backup.
Andy is like an unpaid assistant coach. Now, it sucks that you have to count some of that money towards your cap instead of just your coaching salaries. But at the same time, like I do think that's part of it for him. And I wouldn't be shocked as soon as he's done playing that to see him transition into that type of role. Cause that's a lot of what he's doing here. A lot of guys don't want to do this job. And I don't blame them. Like he doesn't have to do this with Andy or with Bryce. He doesn't. And so like I was never mad at quarterbacks that didn't want to do this with the younger versions of them. And sometimes you had to roll your eyes a bit at some of them, like a Brett Favre that was like, okay, well, you are the heart of this franchise, and here's this young guy coming in, and he's going to eventually replace you, but not right away. And you're going to give him the cold shoulder, only to see Aaron Rodgers get old enough to do the same shit. Wild. But anyway, like you see what I'm saying? They're like a lot of guys don't want to do it. They don't want this guy, but that's even backups. They're like, I'm not getting paid for this. Like, I'm not a coach, I shouldn't have to do this, but like, it's awesome. And I think like that's part of it for them. And I get that. It just,
Lard, I would hope that at 37, I think, I would hope Andy Dalton looks at $6 million guaranteed and recognizes, oh, I am kind of getting paid to do this because there's no reason I should be getting that much money.
Maybe that's like low key baked into it, like we were like maybe Andy's agent was like, listen, we all have eyeballs. We see the cameras on the sideline. We see him chatting it up with Bryce, and he's a big reason. Like he's a helpful guy in this turnaround for him, and we see that. And so, like, if I'm the agent, I'm hammering that too. And like, you can't really argue with that. It's wild that Dave Canales is 6 years older.
I know.
Does, no offense to Andy, who is not old, like bad looking. It's just, it's just...
Andy looks like the grizzled veteran quarterback that Dennis Quaid played in Any Given Sunday at this point. Like he just
Cap.
Cap.
I've seen that movie a lot of times.